So in this introduction, we're going to look at some of the basic parts of the digestive system, and as we work through the digestive system, we are going to start at the top with our mouth and work our way down. So just in this intro, we're going to go over some basic organization of the digestive system, start with the mouth, and again, just kind of slowly work down. We're not going to get too far into it on the intro. And I'm like, again, I always start with this slide. It has some nice prefixes and suffixes and root words and a lot of different words that we're going to see throughout this PowerPoint. And again, a big one, we're going to get through a lot of enzymes, and you'll notice enzymes generally end in ace. And a lot of times the beginning part of the word tells you what those enzymes do or work with. Now, the digestive system itself is put into two groups of organs. The alimentary canal, also known as the gastrointestinal tract, or sometimes we just shorten it to the GI tract. This runs from your mouth down to your anus. This is where the food is actually traveling through. It helps digest food, it helps absorb the fragments of your food into the bloodstream. It includes the mouth, the pharynx, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, and the large intestine. So that whole kind of tube that goes all the way down. Now, that link that you see right there, Mike, I have that link on Blackboard. It's a nice review of the different digestive system organs. I'm like, all together, and I'm like, the whole alimentary or digestive tract is about, well, in a cadaver, we could lay it all out, and it's about 30 feet. It's shorter in living people just because of muscle tone keeps it a little shorter. And our cadavers, they don't have the muscle tone, it's a little bit looser, but it's still one big, huge, long tract. The other group of organs that are part of the digestive system are accessory organs. So they're not part of that tract that food is flowing through, but they help in digestion. That includes our teeth, our tongue, our gallbladder, and we've got various types of digestive glands secreting lots of different types of secretions to help break food down. That includes the salivary glands, the liver, and the pancreas, and we'll talk about all of these throughout this entire PowerPoint. Now, our 6 essential functions or activities that our digestive system does. One is ingestion, which means we are getting food into the mouth, is we're bringing it in. Propulsion means we're moving food through the digestive tract. That goes from swallowing all the way through what's known as peristalsis, kind of the squeezing of the food through the digestive tract. We have mechanical breakdown. That's really increasing the surface area, but we are going to increase the surface area of the food. We are physically breaking it down, whether that's because we are chewing it with our teeth and breaking it down, whether it's our stomach is churning and breaking it down. And then even in our small intestine, we break it apart into segments, so it's called segmentation, but we're breaking that food physically down. Digestion is breaking the food down chemically. It's using the different types of enzymes and breaking the bonds and breaking down lipids and breaking down proteins so that we can absorb those smaller nutrients. Then that next part is absorption, is we have to get the passage of all of that broken down food either into blood or into lymph. And then defecation is to eliminate all the indigestible substances out of the body as feces. So I'm like, we've got a lot going on in our digestive tract. Now, the peritoneum is the membrane that lines the abdominal cavity where we find the majority of our digestive tract. It's a slippery membrane, and anytime we talk about the peritoneum, it's just the membrane that lines the cavity. But it is divided into two parts. There's a visceral and peritoneum. The part that actually lines the external surface is known as the visceral peritoneum. We learned this in lab. The part that actually lines the body walls, the visceral lines the actual organs themselves. Sorry if I flipped that around. Lines the actual digestive organs that are lining inside of this cavity. The parietal peritoneum lines the body wall. The cavity is just the space between them, but there's a fluid in there so that we don't actually have organs rubbing against walls. And I'm like, but it's all serous membrane in this cavity. Some of it lines the actual organs, some of it lines the wall itself. Now, another term when we're talking about the peritoneum and the peritoneal cavity is a lot of times we talk about the mesentery. It's a double layer of peritoneum, so same type of material. And I'm like, but it's a double layer, and it routes blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and nerves to all the different organs. They're not just floating around, hanging out. And I'm like, we do have these different layers that are inside of that cavity that route these different blood vessels. They also can help hold the organs in place and store fat. So we'll see some of these a little bit in the cadaver, but in a couple pictures coming up as well, that a lot of it has this kind of yellowish fatty appearance to it. Now there are some organs that lie behind the peritoneum region. They're called retroperitoneal, retro meaning backwards or back. So they're just lining right behind the peritoneum. Examples, the pancreas and the duodenum part of the small intestine actually line outside or behind that peritoneal area. All the organs that line inside or hang out inside are known as intraperitoneal, because intra means within. Now, of the whole alimentary canal, or the digestive tract, or the gastrointestinal tract, there are 4 basic layers. As you run through the whole thing, you've got to know the 4 basic layers, and in order. And I'm like, as we go through the different parts of the alimentary canal, or the GI tract, we'll talk about how the 4 layers can change, because there's different things that are happening throughout the digestive tract. But they're all the same 4 basic layers. The mucosa layer, and I'll talk a little bit more on each of these the next slides. The mucosa layer is the innermost layer. This is the layer, and I'm like, and it's subdivided as well, but I'm like, this is that inner layer, and I'm like, where the food's going to be found. It's the closest one to where food, the lumen, and I'm like, where food would be found. Below that, or outside of that, is called the submucosa. Submucosa meaning outside. It's outside of the mucosa, or under the mucosa if we're starting inside out. Then there's the muscularis externa. Usually there are 2 layers, the longitudinal and a circular layer. It's the muscle layer. And then the outside layer is known as the serosa, also known as the epithelium, also known as the mesothelium, but it's where we have our connective tissue. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about each of these and some of their functions on these next slide. But 4 basic layers. Again, they can have a few differences between them as you go through the digestive tract, but there's still 4 basic layers. So that mucosa, that inside lining, lines the lumen, that's the innermost layer, and depending on its functions, it kind of depends on where in the digestive tract. It might perform one of these functions, or it could perform all 3. But it's there to secrete mucus. It's where it gets part of its name, mucosa. It can secrete digestive enzymes, and it can secrete hormones. Also, depending on where it is, it could also absorb some of the end products of digestion. So it could absorb some of the amino acids from the breakdown of proteins. Depends on where in the digestive tract. And it can help protect against infectious diseases. Now, that mucosa, that inner lining, does have 3 sublayers. If I go back, that inner lining, the mucosa, does have 3 sublayers: the epithelium, the lamina propria, and the muscularis mucosa. The epithelium, that inner lining, is made of simple columnar epithelium and mucus secreting cells through most of the tract. Not everywhere has those mucus secreting cells. The mucus is there to protect the digestive organs from different enzymes, so we don't digest our own intestinal tract, and it can also ease the food passage because it's a little more slippery with that mucus. It may also secrete enzymes and hormones into the stomach, into the small intestine, and I'm like, to also just aid in digestion. The lamina propria layer contains loose connective or loose areolar tissue. It also has blood vessels for nourishment and absorption. It has lymphoid follicles that can defend against microorganisms from getting in. And the 3rd layer of the mucosa is the muscularis mucosae, which is made of smooth muscle, and it just aids in the movements of the mucosa, the fact that it can move and contract a little bit. Now, underneath the mucosal lining, there is the submucosa, made up of areolar connective tissue. And if you remember from lab, areolar connective tissue has lots and lots of fibers running throughout. It's also where we find lots of blood vessels, lots of lymphatic vessels, lymphoid follicles. Some of our nervous system is going to innervate in there. It allows our GI tract wall to have a nice supply of blood vessels, oxygen, everything else that's needed in there. And our elastic fibers that's found in that areolar tissue allows our stomach to really stretch after we eat a big meal, but then also go back to normal size after the food is moved out of the stomach. The third layer, out of the 4 layers, is the muscularis externa. It's responsible for the segmentation, segmenting the food, and peristalsis, which is moving the food from point A to point B through your digestive tract. So food's going in a one-way direction through your intestinal tract. There are some areas in that muscularis externa that get really thick, and that's where we get some of our sphincters. Again, those sphincters are there to prevent backflow of food, so that food is always going to go from point A to point B through our digestive tract. Now, most areas in the digestive tract have 2 layers of the muscular externa. There's an inner circular layer and there's an outer longitudinal layer. There is one area in our digestive tract where there's 3 layers, but most just have the 2, the inner circular and outer longitudinal, and it's all made of smooth muscle. And then the outer layer, the serosa, that outer layer, also known as the visceral peritoneum, it's really a continuation of the mesentery, where we've got various types of blood vessels. Now there's the mesentery right there, various types of blood vessel, various types of lymphatic vessels, all innervating that outer serosa layer. And it's eventually replaced by what's known as a fibrous adventitia when it gets to the esophagus, and that's because that outer fibrous layer has to anchor the esophagus to surrounding structure so it doesn't shift or move around. And but really it's just that nice outside protective layer. Now, our nervous system does have to control our GI tract, and we have enteric neurons that supply our nerves to our digestive tract. Now, anything that has that prefix enter in it means something with the digestive tract. It means intestinal tract, and that's part of your gastrointestinal tract. Now, there is a nerve plexus called the submucosal nerve plexus. Again, it's because it's going into the submucosal area. It regulates various types of glands and smooth muscle in the mucosal layer. And then we also have our myenteric nerve plexus, and anything my that has that my at the beginning usually is muscle, and this is controlling your GI tract motility. It's controlling the motion, it's controlling that movement of food throughout the digestive tract. It's largely autonomic, we can't control it, and is the food is just going to move through your digestive tract automatically. Now, we're going to those are some of the basics of your GI tract, but we're going to start at the very top and work our way down. Intro, we're not going to get too far, but starting at the very top of our digestive tract, we do have the mouth, and the mouth, anything mouth driven is going to have oral in it somewhere. And so our mouth has what's known as the oral cavity or the buccal cavity. It's bounded or surrounded by your lips, your cheeks, the palate, and your tongue. So that's kind of the whole outside area, that encompasses the cavity itself. The oral orifice, anything orifice means an opening, is the anterior opening. When you open your mouth, that opening now is called your oral orifice, and it's lined with stratified squamous epithelium. Again, and that stratified squamous epithelium is the exact same tissue you find in your skin. Your skin can handle lots of abrasion, and and doesn't hurt it. Well, same thing in our mouth, and our mouth, we're going to put rough food in there, we're going to put hot food in there, we're going to put acidic food in there, and it has to be able to withstand all of those different types of textures and possibly damaging types of things we put in there. Now, the lips and the cheeks. Well, the vestibule is known as the kind of front area, and it's internal to the lips or the labia and the cheeks, but it's external to the teeth and gums. So it's kind of the space between your lips and your cheeks, but in front of the teeth and gums. The fact that you can run your finger along the outside of your teeth, all that area in front of the teeth, but still inside of your mouth, is called the vestibule. Vestibule means entrance area. The oral cavity proper, sometimes they just leave off the word proper. That's the space that's inside of the teeth and the gums. So it's all that area behind the teeth. And then the labia or labial frenulum is an attachment of each lip, and I'm like, to your gums itself. And I'm like, and I've got the picture itself. So first, the oral vestibule, that's the space behind your lips. And I'm like, but in front of your teeth. And I'm like, the labial frenulum is anchoring your cheeks and your gums themselves. And I'm like, to that tissue beneath the teeth. So if you kind of pulled your lips out, you'd be able to see that attachment there. Now, also inside your mouth, we have what's known as the hard palate and the soft palate. The hard palate is made of bones, one of them being the palatine bones, and as well as part of the palatine processes of the maxillary bone. It's the hard bone right at the roof of your mouth. Now, it is slightly bumpy, and it helps create friction when your tongue pushes food up against it. So if you put a finger and touch the top of your mouth, you're going to feel it bumpy. That's your hard palate. It is bumpy. It helps create friction to smush food against it, to break it apart a little bit. As you go further back, the bone runs out, and and we end up having a soft palate tissue. It's made mostly of skeletal muscle, and it helps aid in swallowing. It's going to close off the nasopharynx when you swallow, so food goes down, not up into the nose. And the uvula that hangs down right there is hanging off of that soft palate. And it also kind of helps close off that airway when you swallow, so food doesn't go up. Again, we're hoping for a one-way direction. Now, your tongue that's found inside of your oral cavity is made of skeletal muscle, which means you have control over it. Its functions is to reposition food, mix food during chewing, and form what's known as a bolus. Bolus just means a ball of food. It can help initiate the swallowing reflex, it can help with speech, and it can help with taste. Now, you have intrinsic muscles that can change the shape of the tongue, and you have extrinsic muscles that can alter the tongue's position. And so we use those intrinsic muscles mostly for speech and for swallowing. They're usually a little thinner and longer. The extrinsic muscles really alter the tongue's position. You can stick your tongue out, you can pull your tongue back in, you can move it from side to side. And then our tongue is anchored in, so it's just not flopping around in there, by what's known as the lingual frenulum that attaches just the muscle. If we go back right here, there's that lingual frenulum. If you stick your tongue way up at the top, you can see that attachment right there. Now, on the tongue itself, you have little tiny bumps all over your tongue. Again, you could stick your tongue out in front of a mirror and notice all of these little tiny white bumps, or little tiny bumps all over. Well, some of the bumps, they've got names. One, we have what's known as the filiform. They're a whitish appearance. They give the tongue most of its roughness. They provide some friction, but they don't contain taste buds. So they're mostly for friction. When you're licking an ice cream cone, these are really those filiform bumps that are all over there. And they allow you to lick the ice cream, but not taste it. You've got to move the actual food to your taste buds. The fungiform papillae, they're bigger. There are less of them, and they're scattered all over the front of the tongue as well. They're a little more reddish colored, and it's where you have your taste buds themselves. So yes, when you're licking ice cream, the filiform give the roughness. Fungiform, I think it looks like little fungi, little buds that stick up, and are going to be some of your taste buds. Then you have what's known as your circumvallate, or sometimes just called your valate papillae. At the back of your tongue, you have one big row. It's a V shape for valate, and that also contain taste buds. And then even farther back, we have what are known as your foliate papilla, and those are found on the sides. And so they're on the lateral aspects near the back of the tongue, and they contain taste buds that function primarily in infants and children. And so, yes, when kids are very, very picky about their different kinds of foods, and then their tastes change as they get older, well, it's true. Their taste buds do change. Most of the tasting that kids and infants do are using the taste buds that are on that back outside, the foliate. As they get older, and your other taste buds start to get a little more refined, and they like to finally eat more things. Now, your tongue can secrete an enzyme. It's called lingual, because lingual means tongue. So when people are bilingual, they can speak in tongues or multiple languages. Lingual lipase, again, it's an enzyme. It ends in ase. Lip is because it breaks down lipids. And so it's secreted by some of our cells beneath the foliate and veilate papillae. So these are enzymes secreted by the tongue, and they are a fat digesting, your lipid digesting enzyme. Now, although they are secreted in the mouth from the tongue, really the enzyme doesn't become active until it hits the stomach. So it's an enzyme to break down fats, but we are not breaking down fats in our mouth at all. That enzyme is later used to break down lipids once that food and this enzyme gets to the stomach. But we do have some salivary glands that are also going to have some more enzymes. Now, we have extrinsic salivary glands and intrinsic salivary glands. The extrinsic salivary glands are very large glands that produce the majority of your saliva. They hang outside your oral cavity. There's a parotid salivary gland. In lab, you'll have to be able to identify it. It's a big, huge one right in your cheeks. You have a submandibular salivary gland. It's because it's right below the actual mandible. We kind of cut through the mandible right there, so you can see. It's the submandibular gland and the sublingual gland that's found right underneath the tongue. Sublingual means below the tongue. You also have some intrinsic salivary glands scattered throughout your oral cavity. Their job is really to kind of just keep your mouth moist. Your extrinsic salivary glands are really helping aid in the chewing and digestion and forming those food balls. And so the functions of saliva, well, it's to cleanse the mouth. It's to help dissolve food chemicals for taste. So right away your saliva is breaking some foods down just for taste. It's not full breakdown, full digestion, but it is dissolving some of the food chemicals for taste. And it's moistening food, it's helping compact it into that food bolus, and it does start to begin chemical digestion. And I'm like, so some chemical digestion happens in the mouth with your salivary glands, with that saliva. It's because we do have an enzyme called amylase, A-M-Y-L-A-S-E, and that helps start breaking down starches. That's why if you chew on any kind of starchy food, crackers, things like that, the starches will start to get broken down and actually break down into sugars. So starchy foods can start to taste sweet if they hang out in your mouth long enough, is because that amylase is breaking down the starches. Now, what saliva mostly is water. It's mostly water. It's slightly acidic, so just under pH of 7. But other things that we find in it, we do find some electrolytes, some charged molecules. We find that salivary amylase, that's how you spell the amylase, that can break down some of your starches. We find some of the lingual lipases. They can help break down fats, but again, it really doesn't start till you hit the stomach. The only thing that's getting broken down with saliva is the starch. It contains mucin, which is a protein that also helps lubricate the oral cavity and kind of hydrate some of the food. It can contain metabolic waste like urea and uric acid, and it can contain what's known as a lysozyme that inhibits bacterial growth, which helps for tooth decay, and it contains what are known as defensins that can also protect against microorganisms. They really kind of call white blood cells to order if we are having some type of infection in the mouth. Now, controlling our salivation, we could make 1,500 milliliters a day or 1.5 liters of saliva a day. So if you think how big a 2-liter bottle is, well, we make 1.5 liters of saliva a day. A lot of that is those intrinsic glands that are continuously keeping your mouth moist. And then your extrinsic salivary glands, they're activated by our nervous system when you start eating. And so I'm like, once you ingest that food, and I'm like, we send this that stimulates chemoreceptors, chemical receptors, and mechanoreceptors, because you're moving food around. And I'm like, and we start increasing saliva. Sometimes just the thought of food is enough to get your salivary glands going. Now, a strong sympathetic stimulation inhibits your salivary glands or salivation and results in dry mouth. So a sympathetic is when you're under stress. So if you're super scared, whatever, you saw the bear, and I'm like, it's going to inhibit salivation. You have dry mouth. It's one of the symptoms of anytime you're under stress. Now, also found in the oral cavity in your mouth, we have teeth. Their job really is to tear and grind food. It's a mechanical digestion. Now, your all of your primary, all of your permanent teeth, you'll eventually should have all in by around the age of 21. Now, altogether, you do have two sets of teeth. And I'm like, you have your primary teeth and you have your permanent teeth. You do have 20 primary teeth. These are your first teeth. Sometimes they're called your baby teeth, sometimes they're called your milk teeth. And I'm like, but sometimes they're called deciduous teeth. Just like a deciduous tree loses its leaves in the fall, your deciduous teeth will also be lost. And so you have 20 baby teeth or 20 deciduous teeth that they start to come in anywhere between 6 and 24 months of age. So really by about 2 years, they should all be in. But they hang out there for a few years, but then by the age of 6, the roots of those teeth start to get resorbed and the teeth start to fall out as your permanent teeth are starting to develop and come in to replace those. So starting about the age of 6, the teeth start to fall out and the tooth fairy comes. That happens until you're about 12 years old. Now so by about the age of 12, all of your baby teeth will fall out because you have 32 permanent teeth that are trying to come in and replace those 20 teeth. Now, all but those third molars are in by the end of adolescence. And so most of those are in, I'm going to say, by early teenage years. Your third molars, the last teeth to come in, also known as your wisdom teeth, because apparently you're very wise by the time they come in, usually don't come in until the age of 17 to 25. This is when they can become problematic because depending on how they're positioned and come in, they could be pushing too far forward. They could be impacted by just the space of the other teeth that are already there. And this is usually about the time when the dentists start to realize that they're going to become problematic and people have wisdom teeth removed, usually between the ages of 17 and 25 before they become problematic. Now, this is just to look at some of the difference between your primary teeth and your permanent teeth. Again, I'm like, you have less of your primary teeth, also known as deciduous teeth, and you have more larger permanent teeth coming in. And lab will really kind of take a look at the structures of a lot of these different teeth, because you're going to have to be able to identify incisors from canines, from premolars, from molars, and they are shaped a little bit different because they're really used a little bit differently. Some are used for clipping, some are used for grinding. Now, looking at the structure of a tooth, the outside part of the whole part of the tooth that you can visibly see and brush, hopefully twice a day, is, it's a part of, above the gum line. Now, your gums are officially called gingiva. This is why if you have inflammation of your gums, it's gingivitis. And I'm like, in the crown, the part that you can see that's above the gum line is covered by enamel. That's that white substance on the outside. Your enamel is the hardest substance in the body. And I'm like, it's about as thick as a dime. And I'm like, it's really what's taken the brunt of all of the force when you chew. Now, and I'm like, I was going to say, we have issues with the enamels because bacteria can produce acid and it can wear away. It's a really hard substance, but that doesn't mean it can't eventually get worn away. And we need that hard substance to, yes, protect the rest of the tooth. Now, enamel producing cells will start to degenerate when your tooth erupts or comes through the gums, which means as soon as that tooth erupts out of the gums, when it's being formed, teenage years, early teenage years, kids, whatever enamel is there, that's the only enamel that is there. So there is no healing. If you damage your enamel, it's permanently damaged. And I'm like, if it's cracked, it's, done. You're going to have some type of dental office visit to try to repair, but you yourself will never make more enamel once it erupts through that gums. Now, the part of the tooth that we can't see is the root. Just like you can't see the roots on a plant because they're below the ground, we don't see the roots of the tooth because it's below the gingiva or the gum line. Now, it is the part that's also anchored into the bone tissue or into bone, and I'm like, so that it's not going to move around. It is solidly stuck in there. Now, inside of the tooth, so the outside is all covered with enamel, that really hard substance. It's only found in the crown region. The rest of the tooth all has this what's known as dentin. On the pictures it's blue. It's a bone-like material, so it is strong, but it's not as strong as enamel. Inside of that there is a cavity. It's called the pulp cavity. It's where we have blood vessels, we have nerves, there's some connective tissue in there. Then we also have what's known as the root canal. That's near the bottom of the pulp cavity. And so as the pulp cavity extends down through the root, we call that the root canal. And then the end of the root is known as your apical foramen. It just means the hole at the bottom of your tooth where the blood vessels are going to enter, or the nerve vessels are going to enter, and where they can leave. Now, some things that can happen with your teeth. Well, people that have ever had a cavity is known as a caries. So a dental caries is known as a cavity. And it really is the breakdown of the enamel and the breakdown of the dentin. And it's all because of bacteria. Bacteria that are sitting on your teeth, as you feed them food, they will produce an acid. It's fermentation of that sugar. And that acid is going to wear away at that enamel. And so a dental cavity is a full breakdown of that enamel. Now, after a while, and I'm like, if you don't brush your teeth regularly, you do get kind of, a buildup of the sugar, the bacteria, and any other debris. This is why if you ever scrape your teeth by the end of the day, they feel a little furry. That's plaque. Hopefully you brush twice a day to try to brush that plaque off. But that plaque is sugar and bacteria, and as they are breaking down sugars, they are producing acid that breaks apart that enamel. The enzymes also start to break down some of the organic matter found in the bone that's found in there, that dentin. Best prevention of getting cavities: daily flossing, daily brushing, removing that sugar, removing that bacteria off of your teeth. Now, if you don't brush enough, if you don't floss enough, that plaque that is attaching to your teeth will harden into what's known as a calculus. So it calcifies into calculus or tartar. That's when the dentist or the dental hygienist really has to scrape. It is a calcified material that is now inside or attached to your teeth. Most of it likes to hang out right along the gum line, and because that kind of calcified plaque disrupts the gum touching to the teeth, it becomes inflamed, and your gums become inflamed. You now have something known as gingivitis. Now, because you don't have that nice seal between your gum line and your teeth, bacteria can get in there, and they can cause some serious infections in your mouth itself. Now, it's reversible. If you go into the dentist and they scrape off, really scrape off that tartar, that your gingiva, your gums can form that seal again, and you can heal yourselves. Now, some review for the end of this. The esophagus is part of what, while the pancreas is considered this when it comes to the digestive system? Well, the esophagus is part of the alimentary canal, your digestive tract, where the pancreas is considered an accessory organ, because the pancreas doesn't come into contact with food whatsoever. It doesn't touch food, but it does produce enzymes that help break apart the food. The answer that lists the 4 layers of the walls of your digestive tract, your alimentary canal, from the innermost to outermost. Again, there's those 4 layers. You have the mucosa layer on the inside, followed by the submucosa, followed the muscularis externa, and then the serosa on the outside. Why does your mouth suddenly go dry when you're about to deliver a presentation to a large crowd? Well, that's your sympathetic nervous system when you're under stress that inhibits salivation. And most teeth are primarily composed of dentin. On the picture, that's that blue structure, bone-like structure, that really does make up the majority of the tooth. The enamel is just a tiny little bit on the outside, and it's only found in the crown region. And that's the end of the introduction.